No one showed up for my son's heart surgery. Not one familiar face in the white glare of that waiting room at Cedar Springs Medical Center. The clock struck 6 in the morning. The double doors swallowed him whole, and I sat there surrounded by strangers holding hands that weren't mine to hold. Around me, families huddled together, passing thermoses of coffee, squeezing shoulders, whispering prayers. I had my purse, my phone, and a bag of snacks nobody would eat. Hours crawled by. Every time those doors opened, I looked up. Every time, it was someone else's loved one walking through with good news written across their face. By 3 in the afternoon, every family in that waiting room had left with smiles except me. My chair stayed cold. My phone stayed silent. When the surgeon finally came out, he spoke gently about the procedure, about recovery, about how brave my boy had been. I nodded, I thanked him, I signed papers. But the whole time, I kept glancing at the hallway behind him, half expecting to see my mother rushing in late, my father trailing behind with apologies, my sister Vanessa coming through with some dramatic excuse. They never came. 3 days passed before my phone screen finally lit up with a message. Need $5,000 for your sister's wedding dress. Can you Venmo by Friday? Everyone's pitching in. I stared at those words until they blurred. Then I opened my banking app, typed in 50 cents, and in the note field I wrote, "Buy a veil." I hit send. The confirmation sound was soft, like the snap of a thread breaking. The next morning, the bank called. And that's when everything in our family cracked wide open. Before I tell you the rest, let me ask you something. Where are you listening from? Because I need to know I'm not alone in this. And when you've heard my story, tell me honestly, what would you have done in my place? I grew up learning how to disappear quietly. In our house in Riverside, California, love had a schedule, and it never ran on my time. When I brought home straight A's from Jefferson High, Mom said, "Don't brag, honey. Vanessa gets sensitive about grades." When I fixed the leaky pipe under the kitchen sink at 16, Dad smiled like it had been his idea all along. I learned early that peace came cheaper than recognition, that being overlooked was safer than being celebrated. Vanessa cried once because she lost a silver bracelet Aunt Dorothy had given her. Mom turned the whole house upside down, moved furniture, emptied drawers, cold neighbors. When I misplaced my National Honor Society certificate, she said, "Stop being dramatic, Eliana. It's just a piece of paper. They can print you another one." I stopped asking for help after that. I started staying out of the way. I did the dishes without being asked, paid the electric bill when Dad forgot, stepped in when Vanessa fell apart over small things like a bad haircut or a boy who didn't text back. I became the quiet one, the reliable one, the one no one checks on because she always seems fine. When I landed my first steady job as a medical billing specialist at Mercy General Hospital, Mom called not to congratulate me, but to say, "You're so lucky to have benefits, sweetheart. Maybe you could help Vanessa get started with that photography business she's been talking about." Vanessa hadn't even bought a camera yet. I said sure. Because that's what I always said. Sure. Of course. No problem. Then came the conversation that sealed the pattern for years to come. Mom and Dad sat at my kitchen table one Sunday afternoon, hands folded like they were about to say grace. The late autumn light came through the window, warming the tile floor. I'd just bought the little townhouse in Claremont, my first real place, and they'd come over to see it. "It would just make things easier," Mom said carefully, "if we had access to your savings account. You know, in case of emergencies. Family helps family." I hesitated, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Dad leaned forward, eyes soft. "You've always been so organized, Eliana. So responsible. We'd never touch a cent unless it was absolutely necessary." They left an hour later with signed authorization papers, calling me their dependable girl, their rock. I remember the smell of hazelnut coffee cooling between us, the silence after they closed the door. That was the moment I realized I'd just handed over more than account access. I'd handed over permission to take whatever they wanted whenever they wanted it. Over the next 5 years, emergencies looked like a new dishwasher for their house, a deposit for Vanessa's photography workshop in Napa Valley, funds for a surprise birthday party. Every withdrawal came with a text that read more like a receipt than a thank you. "You're a lifesaver." Never a phone call, never a visit, just expectations dressed up as gratitude. Still, I stayed quiet. When Vanessa posted on Instagram about how Mom always believed in her dreams, I double-tapped the heart. When Dad told people at church that both his daughters were doing great, I nodded and smiled. Though I knew only one of us got a seat saved at the Sunday dinner table. The last time I saw them before my son's surgery, we were at their house for pot roast. Vanessa talked non-stop about her upcoming wedding to Brett, a real estate agent she'd been dating for 8 months. How everything had to be perfect. The centerpieces, the band, the dress. Mom leaned in, glowing, eyes bright. It'll be the event of the season. Everyone's going to remember this wedding. No one asked about my son's condition. Not once. 7-year-old Nathaniel sat beside me, pushing peas around his plate, too tired to eat much. His lips had that faint blue tinge again, the one that made my stomach drop. I passed the rolls, pretending not to notice that I was invisible, pretending not to care. But I did. I always did. That night, after I tucked Nathaniel into bed, I sat at my kitchen counter reviewing hospital forms and pre-surgery checklists. My phone buzzed. A group text from Vanessa. Final dress fitting tomorrow at Belle's Bridal. Can everyone pitch in for alterations? It's only $400 each. Weddings in 6 weeks. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. I didn't reply. I just opened my folder labeled Nathaniel Medical and kept checking every box, every form, every emergency contact line. Because that's what I do. I show up. Even when they don't. 3 days after Nathaniel's surgery, the townhouse was too quiet. The hum of the air purifier. The tick of the wall clock shaped like an owl. Everything sounded louder than it should have. Nathaniel slept on the couch, wrapped in the blue fleece blanket that still smelled faintly of antiseptic and sterile air. His small chest rose and fell carefully, each breath measured, fragile. I'd made chicken noodle soup from scratch and kept the TV volume low, afraid of disturbing the only kind of peace we had left. My phone sat face down on the counter. No missed calls.
No voicemails.
No texts asking how the surgery went, whether Nathaniel was okay, whether I needed anything at all. They all knew the date. I'd sent a group message 2 weeks before with the time, the hospital name, the surgeon's name. Vanessa had replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Dad had written, praying for you both. Mom had hearted the message. None of them came. When the timer beeped, I turned off the stove. That's when my phone buzzed. 3 short vibrations. 1 message. I almost smiled, thinking maybe someone was finally checking in. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked it up. Mom, need $5,000 for your sister's reception dress. The designer needs payment by Friday. Everyone's contributing. Can you Venmo me your share? The steam from the soup pot fogged up my glasses. I pulled them off, wiped them on my shirt, put them back on. Read the message again, slower this time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. There was no how's Nathaniel? No how are you holding up? Just numbers and a deadline. I stood there, soup ladle in hand, broth cooling in the pot. In the other room, Nathaniel coughed in his sleep, a wet, fragile sound. I didn't answer the text. I didn't throw the phone either. I just set it down on the counter and stared at it until the screen went black. The reflection of the overhead light hovered where my face should have been. Later that evening, after Nathaniel ate half a bowl of soup and fell back asleep, I scrolled through old messages. Looking for something, anything that might prove they'd once cared about me beyond what I could provide. There wasn't much. Mostly logistics. Can you pick up the cake? Can you cover the caterer deposit? Photos of Vanessa in white gowns, twirling in fitting rooms. For years, I'd told myself that silence from family wasn't rejection, just poor time management. That maybe being overlooked was safer than being resented. But standing in that kitchen, the truth settled cold and heavy in my chest. It wasn't that they forgot. It was that they chose not to remember. I poured the soup into a container, sealed it, and put it in the fridge. Turned off the kitchen lights. The house fell dark except for the soft glow from the nightlight in Nathaniel's room. That's when I knew. The next message I sent would end this pattern for good. I didn't reply to my mother's message. I just stared at it until the screen dimmed and went black. Then I turned the phone over, face down, like burying something. Nathaniel slept soundly that night for the first time since the surgery, his breathing deep and even. The quiet wasn't comfort. It was space, wide enough for me to think without interruption. I sat at the kitchen counter under a single lamp, the circle of light pooling over hospital discharge papers and pharmacy receipts. All the things I'd kept organized because no one else ever did. I opened my banking app. The balance blinked up at me. My emergency fund. The same one I'd built over years of working double shifts, taking on weekend side gigs, doing medical coding from home, skipping vacations. The same one my parents had access to for emergencies. That word, emergency, had meant something different to them. Broken refrigerator? Emergency. Vanessa's bachelorette trip to wine country? Emergency. Nathaniel's open heart surgery? Not even worth a text. I scrolled through past transfers. Each one a quiet record of my compliance. $300 here. $750 there. $1,200. Little pieces of myself signed away under the illusion of family duty, under the weight of guilt they'd carefully placed on my shoulders since I was old enough to carry it. I tapped the transfer icon. Typed in 50 cents. In the message field, I wrote, "By a veil." Then I hit send. The confirmation sound was soft, like the ping of a bell in an empty chapel. I exhaled through my nose and set the phone down. There was no satisfaction yet. Only stillness. The next morning, the townhouse smelled like cinnamon toast and coffee. Nathaniel sat at the table in his dinosaur pajamas, drawing rockets on the back of a grocery receipt. His coloring was better. Pink instead of pale. "Mom," he said, not looking up from his drawing. "Can we visit Grandma and Grandpa after I get better?" I flipped a piece of toast on the griddle. "Why not?" "Not right now, sweetheart. They're busy with wedding stuff." He nodded, accepting it more easily than I ever had, and went back to his rockets. When he left for his follow-up appointment with the home health nurse that afternoon, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The login screen glowed pale blue. I typed my password and went straight to account management. The cursor blinked. Waiting. Remove joint access. Click. Confirm removal for Linda Hartwell. Click. Confirm removal for George Hartwell. Click. Each action had a sound, a soft digital echo, like paper being torn cleanly from a binder. Then I changed my password. Enabled two-step verification. Set up security questions only I would know the answers to. Printed the confirmation email. Folded it in half and slid it into a manila folder I labeled Access Removed, November 2024. A new tab in my life. Filed and sealed. By noon, the house was filled with rhythmic sounds. The hum of my laptop. The click of the printer. The low buzz of the refrigerator. No music.
No voices.
Just the sound of systems being rebuilt, boundaries being drawn in ink and pixels. At 2:10 p.m., my doorbell rang. I knew that knock. Impatient. Loud.
Familiar.
My brother, Caleb. When I opened the door, he stood there with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes darting anywhere but at mine. "Mom's upset," he said flatly. "Okay. She says you froze her out of your account." "It's my account," I said quietly. He frowned. "She says it was family money." "It's not. Every dollar in there came from me." "She said you promised." "I promised to help in emergencies." I let the pause sit between us. Nathaniel's surgery was an emergency. None of you showed up. That promise expired. Caleb shifted his weight, guilt flickering across his face. "You could have told us how serious it was." "I did," I said, meeting his eyes. "You just didn't want to hear it." For a second, the old habit rose up in me. The urge to explain, to soften, to make him comfortable. I didn't. I just stood there. He sighed. "Mom said you sent her 50 cents. "I did." He blinked. "Why?" "Because that's exactly what her concern was worth." He didn't argue. He just looked at me the way someone looks at a stranger they used to know. Then he turned and walked back to his car. When the door clicked shut, I leaned against it and exhaled. My pulse was steady. My hands didn't shake. For the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like structure. That evening, I sat beside Nathaniel on the couch as he drew more rockets, his tongue poking out in concentration. The TV was on but muted, the room bathed in amber light from the setting sun. My phone buzzed on the counter. Once. Twice. 3 times. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize, one right after another. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my email. A new message from Cedar Springs Bank. Subject: Account access changes, confirmation. Dear Ms. Hartwell, this email confirms that all previous account authorizations have been successfully revoked. No secondary users currently have access to your accounts. If you did not authorize this change, please contact us immediately. I read it twice. Then a third time. Not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to remember this feeling. The precise, quiet moment when control returned to my hands. I forwarded the email to myself, printed it, and slipped it into my folder labeled proof. After dinner, I tucked Nathaniel into bed. He fell asleep mid-sentence, his small hand curled around mine. I watched his chest rise and fall beneath the blanket, the faint surgical scar peeking out from his pajama collar. That scar was proof, too. Of endurance. Of what was worth protecting. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and stared out the window. Across the street, lights flickered on in other homes. Families gathering. Laughing. Existing without me. And for once, that didn't sting. Because tonight, I wasn't excluded. I had chosen absence. Before bed, I took one last look at my folder. The tidy stack of printed emails and bank confirmations. Evidence not of revenge, but of correction. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and let the silence stay. This time, it belonged to me. The next morning began like any other. Gray light slipping through the blinds. The quiet hum of the heater. Nathaniel still asleep. I poured coffee and watched the steam twist upward, the house holding its breath. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then stopped. A few seconds later, it rang again. Unknown number. I answered. Ms. Hartwell. A man's voice, courteous, measured. This is Ethan Cole from Cedar Springs Bank. Your mother is here in my office. She's saying she's having trouble accessing an account you share. I stared at a crack running up the wall from the baseboard. There's no shared account, I said evenly. She was an authorized user. That access has been revoked. A pause. Understood. She's insisting it's a family fund, not an individual account. It's my savings, I replied. Every deposit came from my paychecks. There's nothing to dispute. Through the phone, I could hear muffled voices. My mother's pitch rising, sharp and desperate. Tell her she can't just take our money. Tell her this is theft. Mr. Cole's voice stayed calm. Would you like me to explain the account policy to her? Yes, I said. And please note the time of this call in your records. He hesitated, as if realizing something larger was unfolding. Of course, Ms. Hartwell. The line went silent. Then a soft click. I set the phone down. The clock on the wall ticked. Once. Twice. Loud enough to sound like applause in an empty theater. An hour later, someone pounded on my door. Hard. I didn't move from the couch. The knocks came again, then a familiar voice shouting through the wood. Eliana. You can't do this. Mom's in tears at the bank. Vanessa. I walked slowly to the door and opened it just enough for the chain lock to catch. Her face was flushed, mascara smudged. You skipped my son's surgery for cake tastings, I said quietly. Don't lecture me about tears. Her face twisted. That's not fair. No, I said. It isn't. She pushed forward, but the chain held. You think freezing Mom out fixes anything? You've humiliated her in front of a bank manager. She humiliated herself, I said. All I did was log out. For a second, neither of us spoke. Her eyes darted past me to the stack of papers on the kitchen table. The folders labeled in blue ink. Evidence of a woman who'd stopped asking for permission. You're destroying this family, Vanessa whispered. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm just not funding it anymore. She left without slamming the door, which somehow felt louder. By noon, the calls slowed. By 2 in the afternoon, they stopped altogether. I sat in the quiet, sipping coffee that had gone cold, the mug heavy in my hands. Through the living room window, the world carried on. Traffic lights changing. People crossing streets. Dogs being walked. None of them knowing that a quiet war had ended in my kitchen. Later that evening, another email arrived from Cedar Springs Bank. Subject: Account audit complete. All external access permanently closed. Confirmation report attached. I downloaded the PDF. Printed it. The sound of the printer was soft, rhythmic, final. Nathaniel woke from his nap and padded into the kitchen, hair messy, socks mismatched. "Mom," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Can we make chocolate chip pancakes tomorrow?" "Of course," I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. He smiled, satisfied, and shuffled back toward the living room. The house went silent again. But this time, the quiet wasn't empty. It was earned. I slid the printed confirmation into my folder marked proof and locked it in the desk drawer. A small act of ceremony. Unspoken but complete. Outside, the last light faded. The blinds cast thin shadows across the kitchen table where my phone used to buzz endlessly with demands disguised as requests. Now it just lay there, face down, motionless. I closed my eyes and listened to nothing. The kind of nothing that meant everything had finally stopped moving without my permission. 2 months passed. The days found their rhythm again. School drop-offs at Maplewood Elementary. Grocery runs to Trader Joe's. Small talk with neighbors who didn't know anything about the storm that had come and gone. Nathaniel healed faster than the doctors expected. The scar on his chest turned from angry red to pale pink, a thin line that caught the light when he lifted his shirt to show me how strong he'd gotten. We lived slower now. Mornings smelled like blueberry pancakes and hazelnut coffee instead of hand sanitizer and fear. I'd stopped checking my phone for messages that never came. The silence that once scraped my heart raw had softened into something like calm. One evening near dusk, the doorbell rang. A delivery envelope sat on the doormat. No return address. Just my name written in my father's slanted handwriting. Inside was a check for $5,000. The wedding wasn't an emergency. Folded once, Nathaniel's neatly. Surgery was. We chose wrong, and we hurt you both. This check isn't for you to cash. It's to remind you of the value we forgot. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know that I finally understand. Dad. I read it twice. Then I laid the check on the counter beside the tea kettle. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze from the open window, a faint sound like breathing. Nathaniel came into the kitchen barefoot, dragging his favorite blanket. "Mom, who's it from?" "Grandpa," I said. "He wrote to say he's sorry." Nathaniel frowned, thinking. Does that mean we have to go see them now? "No," I said softly, crouching down to his level. "It just means they're learning. We don't have to open the door until we're ready. And maybe we never will be. That's okay too." He nodded, satisfied, and wandered back to the living room where his Lego spaceship waited. The sun was sinking low, the apartment glowing in soft gold. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my folder, right behind the bank confirmation. Proof of 2 things. What was taken, and what was finally mine again. Through the window, I could see our reflections on the glass. 2 shapes, side by side. Steady. Unbroken. I didn't cash the check. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk where I could see it every day. Not as forgiveness, but as a reminder. Family isn't a debt you keep paying. It's a choice you make. To keep or to let go. I used to think peace meant fixing everything that broke between us. Now I know peace is what's left when you stop explaining yourself to people who never wanted to understand. And when the silence finally sounds like home. If this story hit close to your heart, know you're not alone. Some wounds don't need revenge. They need release. Tell me where you're listening from and what peace looks like to you. Because maybe, somewhere out there, someone else is learning that silence can be the loudest answer of all.